The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang is one of those books that, since it came out in 2018, has always been a book I've heard positive things about. It has been constantly recommended, and I've been wanting to read it ever since it came out. Now it's 2025, so it's about 7 years ago it came out, and I've finally gotten around to it. And it's the first book in the trilogy by the same name. By at the time this book got written, so 2018, debut author R.F. Kuang. In 2018, it was nominated for both Reader's Favorite Fantasy and Reader's Favorite Debut Author. Currently, it stands just shy of 4.2 on Goodreads with 53,000 reviews and almost 340,000 ratings. So it's a book that a lot of people have looked into, either read or partially read. So let's talk about the cover. For the cover, it's interesting as it's kind of the same style as Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn books that came out at the same time. This flowery, almost perfectly monocolored design. I think it works. It looks really, really good. It's insane how good I think it looks. I can't tell you though how much I love this stuff. This and then this little speck of orangey red to remind us of both the war and the poppy flowers, while not being too much so that it distracts from everything. It's perfect, and I love how we get Rin standing with her bow ready, but not in a full frontal pose, but more of in the side, as if, she's only part of the war, a small part of it. And finally, we get this smoky effect again to remind us of drugs, because a lot of drugs are smoked in this book, while also remind us of war and the aftermath, like fires. Absolutely brilliant cover. The only thing is, of course, as always, quotes on the cover. I hate them. Now let's take a look at what's called Section 1. And Section 1 is what I thought would be basically half this book. It goes all the way up to somewhere around here. So as you can see, it's pretty, there we go. This is Section 1, so it's a bit more than a third. Now, this book takes place in an imaginative China, what feels like after the Warring States period. I have never read a book taking place in that time, nor feeling so accurate to what little knowledge I have of history. So much of how this world is described feels straight out of a history book, but without all the academic boring part. A lot of concepts are introduced, but Kuang never dwells on them for too long. She explains, and the world builds basically, and then she moves on before it becomes exposition dumps, which is great. The main character, Rin, is an absolute treat. She's smart, funny, and resourceful. But it doesn't feel like she's too smart for her own good. She learns a lot of things from books, but it's all word by word and not actually understanding details. And she admits that she just wants to pass the test. And to do that, she kind of games the system. And she knows that the curriculum is set, so she just needs to know that. No need to deeper understand it. Just like school in many cases. Kinda sad to think about. My two favorite scenes are both when Rin outwits the adults. First, her adoptive mother, who she calls Auntie Fang, by letting her know how much Rin can hurt her opium business. And secondly, when the scholars tries to get her out of going to the school by trying to make her confess to cheating. But we were shown in the beginning how far the scholars would go to prevent cheating, so she calls their bluff by saying that means they did a horrible job if a farmer's girl can cheat on the test. I'm 3 chapters in by this point when we'd gone through those scenes, and I'm absolutely having a blast. It's a page turner in this book, and I can't wait to see what happens when she gets to the academy. Talking of the academy, I love how it feels like a major city in the worst way possible. There are people trying to trick and rob people from smaller towns. Scams are everywhere, and they don't even bother to hide it. Also, the language is so different and it makes sense. In Denmark, the way I speak Danish compared to how it's done in Copenhagen is widely different. Of course, we can easily understand each other, but I could see with great enough distance and low population movement between regions, languages might develop to be more of two almost separate languages. Now, the actual school part is super interesting. The concept of a war school isn't unique, we've actually talked about one before, Fourth Wing, but where I think this book differs from Fourth Wing and other war school-based stories is how it handles teaching. Everything is based around tradition and what you're good at. After your first year, a master takes you on as an apprentice and you get specialized. But for the first year, everyone has to know a lot of everything. It's great that to be a great fighter, you still need to understand some medicine, some strategy, some linguistics, and some history. It's easy to just say be good at one thing, but really you want to be a little all-rounded so you can communicate with different departments and all that. Of course, it was highlighted in Fourth Wing when they had to work with the infantry units, but it wasn't developed upon. Here it feels like it was developed upon and really a main thing. Now the actual school part is also very interesting. How things are taught is also awesome. There's an assumption everyone knows a lot of the basics, but the teacher still forces them to use the basic techniques and train them. Even though you might know the basics, you can still be better at them. I like how the thought experiments are set up to teach strategy and history. It's a great way to get your mind working and thinking outside of the box. And this is something Rin is extremely good at, and the teachers recognize it. But there's no way of learning how to fight. Which brings me to my two favorite scenes as a reading to chapter 6. 6? Aha, 6. The first is the illegal duel with Nessar, where she wins by using a technique their female tutors taught them. Kick men in the balls. The second is when they have to spar with the staff, and Nessar just with the staffs, not the people working there, but actual war staffs. And Nessar just pummeling Rin, and the teacher, being a huge, almost racist bigot, decides to just slap Nessar on the wrist and expel Rin from the classes. Which she correctly predicts is because he thinks people from the lower classes don't belong there, while those from the warlords and the capital have an almost divine right to be there. The teaching from Jiang, though, that's so fucking cool and interesting. The man is a menace to society, but also a genius. I love the philosophy behind martial arts, and funnily enough, it's the same type of ideology I was taught when practicing. That the fighting and war aspect is only a tiny part, that when you are fighting you are distilling everything you were taught down to its most bare forms, but the true style lies in the martial arts, in the art part of it. For training for the tournament, I love the focus on building stamina. Yeah, the pig method is silly, but it just fits with Jiang's menace to society character. But it also slowly builds stamina as the pig grows over time. The realization from Rin then, when fighting there is a finite amount of ways to move, is awesome. It shows the perception of a character, but also that a lot of moves are, when looked at it, consist of just smaller move. It's just iterations of the same type of move. And then when we get to the tournament, and the fact that when Rin right away realized that all her classmates were taught the same style of fighting, therefore developed the same kind of predictable patterns, it was great to see, because that is what happens when you had one teacher. Especially when one teacher focuses on distilling down to the bare roots of fighting. And this allowed her to slow the fighting down and use the stamina that she built to outpace them. And realizing she's so much better and therefore has the best option is to turn a sprint into a marathon. It's absolutely brilliant to read, because even though it's in the middle of a fight and we have high action paced, it's slowed down so we get to be in her head and learning what she's thinking. And the final fight against Nessar highlighted why she still needed to practice and train. She can be outlasted, especially when your opponent isn't planning on fighting under the same rules as you. On that note, it was great after the fight to see her run to Jiang for help with the burning that she's feeling. but also that it isn't explained until the end of the section. Afterwards, we get the celebration break, where we get Kite and Rin just being teenagers. They're having fun, and Rin seeing the pretty side of the capital, the rich side. It's a great little section of character building, and it works great adding some flavor to the relationship, but overall doesn't really impact the story. And when we get back to trading under Xiang, and that is for the most part the rest of this section. And Xiang forces Rin a lot to write essays and explain wild concepts and find and make comparisons and similarities between very broad and wide topics. Define what a god is, what does religion mean, why do we have it? All those questions still to this day unanswered. And I love the little discussions we get on different topics. We don't get lectures in the traditional sense. Xiang is teaching Rin, and by extension us, to expand and see connections that might not be the most obvious. We get some great mixture of politics, theology, culture, and many more subjects in the humanities. You could argue the other classes Rin has more interest in the how, where law is interested in the why of the world. And to me that is a more interesting question. Don't get me wrong, I love the tactic sequences where we get wild strategies to weird military situations. But I prefer the why do we have religious traditions? Why, if we aren't believing in them, where does the gods come from? This philosopher who had this thought, how does that fit in with this philosopher 200 years earlier? How are they saying the same thing while still being opposite or whatever? I love those aspects. And so far, as a first part here, an absolutely amazing book. I understand 100% why it gotten so much praise and why it's so popular. Can't wait to read the next section. The final 2/3 of the book is upon us, and it starts out wildly. We leave Rin to follow the POV of Tyr, the commander of the assassins, the Psyche. And it's very confusing since it seems the Empress is under control from the Federation, yet goads them into declaring war on Nikara. Maybe it's a ruse and an excuse for the Federation to attack? Maybe it's because she gambles on winning a defensive war. We don't know as of the first chapter. We do know she's a shaman too. Next up is a fast-paced sequence of communication between Nikara and the Federation, and it's awesome. It's fast-paced, it's quick, it's just two countries like goading each other, and they only say the least necessity, and then it's almost too much at times even. It also cuts down on a lot of unnecessary filler that would have dragged the book out, like a lot of the meeting. It's like the cabinet met for 2 days, their answer was, well then come and fight us. It's absolutely wonderful. And then we get to the war. And I like how Rin realizes they were never trained to kill. They were trained to fight without killing. They of course is because none of them were meant to ever fight as soldiers, but as officers and commanders. They weren't meant for the front lines. The fighting they learned was so if they needed to defend themselves, they could, or establish they were better fighters than the soldiers. And it wouldn't do to kill your own soldiers, hence the fighting without killing part. This creates great drama when the fighting starts, because Rin is scared, conflicted, and generally not prepared for the battle. However, once she starts fighting along the Tsar, I love it. It's amazing and fun, and I wish the scene would have gone on for longer. Especially because it was great but underwhelming in both length and description of the fighting. While it definitely was one of my favorite sequences, it's just not living up to the hype it had built. Maybe I overhyped it myself, but I feel like Kwang kind of dropped the ball on the ball a little here, because we got a lot of small hints that they would complement each other well if they could just stand each other for 2 seconds. So really it would have been great to see them then fight for longer together. Oh well, still great. And then we have the magic of the gods. First Xiang calling some gods or spirits to fight for him and to win the Federation army, and then Rin calling the Phoenix. The fear Rin feels and the fear everyone feels is great because it's the same, just directed differently. Rin understands that it's a god that she can't control, while everyone thinks it's her and she can't control herself. It's kind of the same, but slightly different. It makes for a narrative interest when she's held back. So of course she is forced to join the Psyche, because she's different and everyone else is scared of her. Talking of the Psyche, I enjoy the ragtag group so much. They're all amazingly fun and unique characters and great colorful cheerfulness to a otherwise quite bleak story and situation. Now with that said, I still think it would have been better if we'd stayed with the character we spent almost half the book getting to know, like Kite, Shang, Nessa, Vasca, I think her name was. But at last it isn't done badly, so it's not too jarring of an experience. Altan is the leader now of the Psyche, and him trying to teach Rin is great. He is the polar opposite of Xiang. Rin of course enjoys getting the answers and the direct teaching that she's never gotten before. But I think it also serves a narrative purpose. Altan acts more like the other masters, only looking at the surface knowledge that would produce results now. Kinda like fighting Master Jun in the martial arts. This is what we need to do to win here and now. We don't need to understand deeper. We can always do that. That's for the nerds. Now looking at the story, we get to the port city of Khol-Adain as the front between the Kara and the Federation. The attack on the boat landing was absolutely great. We got to see the power of all the members of the Psyche, except one, and we'll talk about him later. But we also get a great realization from Rin. The members aren't commanding the guards to help them, it's a mixture of begging and letting them take over. And that really scares her. And I think this is the point where she realizes the problem and the fear Shang was trying to explain and instill in her. Afterwards you get a perfect couple scenarios that describes the ruthlessness of the Federation. Firstly, the mock surrender discussion, where it's about Nikara surrendering, and as a peace offering the enemy brings salt and sugar. And they test the sugar and it's not poisoned. However, the salt is saltpeter, and while they have their negotiations, the saltpeter lights up and explodes the central square. This act of terrorism shows how far the Federation is willing to go. And pair that with them lighting stray animals on fire to burn down the suburbs to create fugitive crisis, we truly see how horrible the enemy is. Which I must say is kind of wild to read. This is such a dark book, and there's only a few characters here I would say are good, and that's Rin and Shang. The rest are either morally grey or what I would say straight up evil. It's kind of great to read, but it's also a bit of an experience when my only real grimdark is the Prince of Thorns and King of Thorns book. So, you know, but I like it. It's fun. And this is followed by much needed reinforcements. The 7th division is turning in, and with this we get a familiar face, Nessa. And I can't tell you how happy I got when I read that our favorite Smug Brad was back. Seeing him and Rin talking, working out their history over the next chapter, and them actually becoming friends is a tremendous treat. I would say Nessa might be the 3rd or 4th, depending on how you look at Kite, character that I would think could be considered good. Before talking about the Talwu and the woman in the dream, I want to touch on the poison gas and the monster fight. I know it's the opposite order of when it takes place, but it doesn't really matter. And you can complain in the comment section below if you want. Poison gas is in my opinion one of the most horrendous types of weapons you can use. The fear it creates in the city is why it's banned in war, also the pain, it's very painful. It's why whenever a country organization uses anything like that, it's a huge deal. It is absolutely terrifying, and it isn't a clean, quick death. I don't remember the monster's name, but damn isn't it terrifying. Let's get back to the point quickly. And it's just another thing to add to why the Federation are just written as pure evil. Like, they're not morally great. You can't understand why they're doing it. Like, you couldn't make a good argument. They're just evil. And I think now we got it. Now, I don't remember the monster's name. Let's get back to that. But damn, it's a terrifying concept. It creates the face of someone you know and love, and just to hypnotize you into trusting it, and then it eats your face. I love we get some more Nessa and Rin action, but I would love for it to be more like the first time, where we got to see how great fighters they are. But still, it worked great for bonding them, but also to remind us what Zhang did to save them. Now let's talk about the Talwu and the woman. I love that she just wants to protect Rin, and that in her desperation manages to make it worse. Instead of making it sound like Rin haven't seen horror, she should be more understanding and maybe spend a few more sentences, just a few more than you already did, explaining what's going on. But apparently she's trapped in that prison they use for when shamans go mad, but I think she's there because she refused to do what the Empress wanted. I also love that Chagan, that's the final member of the Psyche, isn't strong enough to really banish her, only to keep her away. And the Talwu scene was interesting because it shows how much deeper this dream world goes. How much Rin and Elton knows and doesn't know. And when Chagan said Zhang doesn't know a lot, I don't believe it. I just don't think Zhang was ready to teach the next stages to Rin. Also, I got a feeling Zhang got his memories wiped somehow to keep him in the academy to search for potential shamans instead of being in the prison. But alas, I love the scene and I wish we could have got more of it. What I would have preferred though is some more scenes where Rin is alone with the higher entities. It's not nearly as interesting when she's when she is with someone who knows much more than her and doesn't explain it to her properly. I love the one with Zhang, and I think the Talwu would have been so much better if Chagan had been left outside the room to then have her repeat the answers. But have her talk with the Talwu on her own. Maybe have Chagan be like, oh, here are the rules, but I can't go with you because otherwise nothing will happen. And then she goes in and talk with the Talwu, and that would have been so much better in my opinion. It was good, I think it could have been better. I said part 2 was the rest of the book, and I thought it was, but apparently the last quarter is a part of its own, so here we go. Firstly, we get the travel to the new capital, and when we reach the capital, we see they are too late. The atrocities described paints a wild pictures. It's insane how inhumane the Federation treated the surrendering Likkara forces. The description from Kitei on how they mutilated everyone and made a sport out of killing babies. It literally paints a dark, nearly perfect black picture. It was actually really hard, especially reading what happened to the women forced into the pleasure houses. I actually had to take a short break. It was almost too dark, even for this book. Like, almost unnecessarily dark. It's just a slaughter. Can't believe that slaughter would be just a thing. And that would have been better. I think Kwang really wanted to sell that the Federation is pure evil, and we're gonna get into that in the conclusion, what I think that is supposed to represent. And it worked, but it wasn't necessary. The terrorism acts we've seen were plenty fine. Maybe give us some news that, oh, they had been bombing cities or sending peace offerings to surrendering cities and then bomb them like we'd seen. But kinda stick to their lane of, they done this type of terrorism, will stick to that. That's still weird to say though. It was however really nice to get some closure on what happens to Zhang, but also a description of who he is. I am sad that he was such a coward, and instead of hiding and locking himself away, he should have tried to right his wrongs. Maybe he'll show up in the next books? Who knows, but I don't think it was a fitting ending for him. Even if it was predictable who he actually was, I just wish he would have been there to teach Rin more of her personal control while she could teach him about controlling the guards, because I think they could teach each other a lot. And I'm gonna skip over the descriptions and scenes of the experiments done to the shamans by the Federation, because again, it's just to create a black picture, and we already know how horrible they are. I am not that versed in Chinese history, but it's almost as if Kwang is trying to paint some enemy, maybe Japan, as a villainous evil country. It kinda leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Not saying it's what she's trying to do, nor that she would be lying, cause I don't know, I'm not versed enough in the history. But it seems she tries to make it like China is a way nicer people and culture than the Japanese are. I might be missing some details, but the way she describes the Federation reads heavily as a type of propaganda to me. And it does kinda paint a monotone picture of the war. Now let's skip ahead to when Rin talks with the Phoenix and learns what she kinda already knew. The guards can't control her, technically. They can only do what she lets them. And that is fine and all. But it then doesn't explain how the Phoenix could kill the Spearly Queen if she refused to do its bidding. It doesn't explain why people go mad, at least not directly. It's more indirectly because your mind is being shared with a guard. But I would love for it to be more explored in the narrative of the story than just tagged along at the end of the chapters. It feels like Kwang wasn't quite sure how to justify that some people could be killed or broken while others couldn't. And then Rin destroys the Federation mainland and kills everyone. She tries to justify it to Kitei, but he calls out on the hypocrisy, that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. It just doesn't seem like Kwang is... It seems like Kwang is more hell-bent on showing revenge and justifying the murder of innocents than actually ending it in a nice way. But let's get to the conclusion. This book is the first third to half is so good. That's a like 4 out of 5 book for me, almost 5 out of 5, nearly perfect. And then we get to the last half, and especially the last fourth, especially part 3 is when I have a problem, because that's when the book reads like propaganda for the Chinese during the Second Sino-Japanese War, where events like the raping of Nanjing happen. And while they are horrible atrocities that happen and should not be forgotten, and the books should not be forgotten, this book reads wholly like a pro-China propaganda story. The uses of opium kind of diminishes the problem with the drug China had at the time, but it also doesn't add anything. The book doesn't do anything with it that any fantasy spiritual power couldn't do. You could replace the opium with anything else and it would have worked equally well. In general, I love the use of art of war. I love how tactics and philosophy is described. I love the culture we get. It's super interesting and it adds a lot of flavor that I haven't seen anywhere, and it was fun, and I wish we got more of that and less what feels like propaganda. So that's why for me this book is actually not that good at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I would not recommend people reading it. Yeah, for me it went from a 4 out of 5 to a 2 out of 5. That's gonna be my hot take. The Poppy War is not a very good book. Yeah, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you thought of the Poppy War and of all the things I discussed. Maybe you saw it differently, who knows, but let me know. Bye.